We're going to be heading to Melbourne, Australia for this episode. Nothing to do with neighbours, though I did meet Alan Fletcher a couple of times, and I have a t-shirt signed to Dr. Steve from Dr. Carl, which is one of my most prized possessions. But all of this is by the by. Rather, we're heading to Melbourne to look at the disappearance of a teenager in 1999. Rachel Barber was a young girl who seemed to have it all. She was chasing her dreams. She had hugely supportive parents, a budding relationship, and the world was her oyster. But one day, she just vanished. Obviously, if I'm telling it, it's going to be a tragic tale. But as much as anything, this story is about someone taking advantage of the naivety of a teenager. Someone that the young girl should have been able to trust. So trust she did, and that trust was broken in the very worst way, and for a very sinister reason. By the time we reach the end of the story with revelations about where things stand now, I'd love to know what you think and whether you believe justice was done. I suspect this case will make you angry, but whatever you feel, I'd like to know about it. This is the case of the beautiful and talented young dancer Rachel Barber and her sudden disappearance. And this is Murder of Crows.
You say that you're ready, but you won't like it. You say that you're ready, but you won't like it. Silence all the crows, lining up in little rows. A sudden chill surrounds me. Silence all the crows, see come out and say you're old. A sudden chill.
We're heading to the other side of the globe to visit Australia and one of its major cities in Melbourne, which surrounds Port Phillip in the province of Victoria. It is a city of remarkable diversity, culture and beauty. There are things you may expect, like the Botanical Gardens, Melbourne Zoo, and the world-famous Melbourne Cricket Ground, known to cricket fans globally simply as the MCG. But there are also things you may not expect, like the street art around the area of Hosier Lane, the penguins returning home after a busy day, which you can see at St Kilda Pier, and the hourly fireball displays at night time along Melbourne's south bank. It has been named as one of the most livable cities in the world, and it's easy to see why. But it's not without its darker elements, as is true of pretty much every society in the world. But as well as darkness, this is a story about naivety, both from a very trusting teenager who bought an unconvincing offer, and from a perpetrator who wrote everything down and fucked themselves from the outset of the investigation. And there's also a heartbreaking abuse of trust that sees a young girl cruelly betrayed in the worst way. Rachel Barber was born on the 12th of September 1983 and grew up with two younger sisters named Heather and Ashley Rose. She was a striking child, and her wide green eyes easily captured attention. She was very shy and quite introverted, but as she grew up, she always came to life when she danced. If she wasn't sleeping, she was dancing, or thinking about dancing, or watching dancing. Some people take a long time to find their thing in life, but Rachel was born a dancer. But as well as a natural flair and passion for dancing, the young girl was also dedicated to growing and improving as a dancer. When Rachel was 9 years old, the Barber family moved to Mont Albert, a Melbourne suburb known to be friendly and to be a family-oriented area. The family settled in very well and became close with other families in the area. In fact, the Robertsons, who lived opposite the Barbers, had a young daughter who was one of the Barber girls' school friends. But the Robertsons also had an older daughter who was about 14 when the Barbers moved to the area, and this older daughter would often babysit the Barber girls. Such was the close-knit nature of the community. Rachel's passion for dance never dimmed, and her parents supported her, taking her to regular dance classes. And with her academic work being okay but not amazing, it seemed clear that her creative pursuits far outweighed her academic potential. So when Rachel wanted to drop out of regular education to chase her dancing dreams full-time at a dance school, her parents decided to support her to make the switch, and in late 1998, shortly after turning 15, she joined the Dance Factory studio in Melbourne, which was a fairly prestigious dance school within regional circles, and this dance school was located about 7 miles from her home. And it was at the dance school that Rachel would make another discovery. When she started attending, she noticed a fellow student called Emmanuel Carella, who everyone called Manny. The two were drawn to each other, and they began a relationship with a shared love of dancing at its core. In fact, fellow students even called the young couple Romeo and Juliet. Of course, no one knew then that their story would also turn out to be a tragedy. Rachel continued to develop as a dancer, but at the same time, her striking looks were also making impressions among modelling circles. The girl who had babysat her, Caroline Robertson, actually approached Rachel's parents for permission to use Rachel as a model for a photography project that she was doing. Such were the young girl's striking looks. With the dance school being 7 miles from her home, Rachel needed to catch a tram to get there, and that part was simple enough. But she also needed to get to the tram stop to begin with. But Rachel's ever-supportive parents wouldn't let simple logistics stand in the way of Rachel's dreams. So Rachel's parents would take it in turns to drop her at the tram stops. And her father would drop her at the tram stop on the corner of Riverdale and Elgar Road on his mornings, and pick her up from there on those evenings. Now, the 1st of March 1999 was a Monday like any other, and Michael dropped his talented daughter off at the tram stop as usual. They said goodbye to each other at around 9:30 a.m, and they agreed that Michael would meet Rachel there to take her home at around 6:15 p.m. But when that time came and went, Michael waited a further hour at the stop in case she was running late, but then called home to say that Rachel hadn't shown up. And this was very out of character. She was very close with her parents, so if she made other plans or something had come up, she would have let them know, even if teenagers can sometimes be sneaky buggers. Since the job of dropping Rachel at the tram was staggered between the Barber parents, with Elizabeth normally dropping Rachel off at a different tram stop, Michael went to check the Camberwell stop in case she had alighted there instead of the Wattle Park stop that her dad would collect her from, but he still had no luck in finding the 15-year-old girl. But Rachel's mother Elizabeth immediately felt something was off, so she wasted no time calling the police and reporting Rachel missing. But the police did not seem as distressed or concerned as Elizabeth Barber. In fact, they were, in technical jargon, fucking useless. They brushed aside the Barber's concerns, saying that she was most likely missing of her own choice, and she would be back at some point soon. Feeling they had no choice, the Barbers took things into their own hands and visited stations, called hospitals, and also spoke to Rachel's friends and prioritised speaking to her boyfriend, Manny. If any of her friends knew anything, Manny would know, as since they had started their relationship, Rachel and Manny had become practically inseparable. Manny knew nothing for certain, but he did pass on some concerning things that Rachel had been saying, especially on the last day that she was seen. Apparently Rachel had talked about a job she had lined up for that night that would be well paying, but not to worry, it was nothing illegal or immoral. She said that she couldn't talk about it until it was done, but that she would tell Manny about it when she could. Manny also passed on that the two had walked by a shoe store on Swan Street where a pair of blue platform shoes she had been fancying for some time were on sale. Rather than just looking enviously at the display as she normally did, this time Rachel had gone inside and asked for a pair in her size to be put aside for her, and she would call in the next day to complete the purchase. So it seemed that there was a mystery job about which Rachel was so confident of getting good money there and then that she put the shoes on reserve. Elizabeth was confused by what Manny had told her. She was not aware of Rachel having attended any job interviews recently, and had no idea where she may be getting this money from. And with the police still reluctant to start any kind of full investigation, the Barbers continued their efforts to do things themselves. When they went to the shoe shop, the workers confirmed that the shoes had been reserved for Rachel, but that she had not returned to pay for them. And they also checked with other local shops in the area, And while most of the workers did recognise Rachel, being from the local area, they had not seen her in their stores in recent days. But these inquiries did uncover some potentially worrying information that was revealed by one of the shop workers. The proprietor of a local brothel had recently been released from prison. And this seemed to coincide with a number of reports of girls being approached and told that they could make good money working at a brothel, as you do. This was obviously alarming, and while the Barbers doubted that Rachel could be convinced to do sex work, they still contacted the brothel. Now, this brothel, it seemed, was a perfectly legitimate business, and they took measures to ensure that any of their workers were of age, and they would never randomly approach strangers for potential recruitment. But despite this, it did start the Barbers thinking of less palatable possibilities that could have befallen their very precious daughter. When the dance school staff became equally concerned, they contacted the local police themselves, and they were in the Richmond area, and they were told that because the disappearance had originally been reported to the Box Hill local force, they were the ones who needed to take action. Now, this obviously infuriated the Barbers and all of their supporters, who were all of the belief that it shouldn't matter where things were reported, the outcome should be equal and unified across all forces. But apparently not. In the end, it would take several days of pressure before the police actually did anything of note in the search for the missing girl. And during this time, unsurprisingly, the Barbers grew increasingly angry, including Elizabeth Barber at one point collapsing in tears outside the police station in sheer agony and frustration at the lack of support from the police. Now, about a week after Rachel's disappearance, flyers with Rachel's picture and information were starting to appear in the wider community as the word spread outwards. And it was through this that they piqued the attention of a woman called Alison. Alison was the older sister of one of Rachel's friends. And seeing the picture on the flyer, it sparked a memory for Alison. Alison had seen a girl she was sure was Rachel in a tram with an older girl that she described as older than Rachel and plain looking. Now, this was on a number 6 tram in the suburb of Parole, nowhere near where Rachel should have been. Yet Rachel did appear to be quite at ease. With the police finally getting involved, they got a sketch artist to draw a likeness of the woman that Alison had seen Rachel with. The final image was shown to the Barbers, who found it somewhat familiar but could not place it. And then following this, it was given to the media, which sparked a huge public interest in the case. But given that Alison had definitely seen Rachel with a female, the Barbers began compiling a list of girls and women that Rachel had even a passing acquaintance with, however tenuous the link. And it was through doing this that the name Caroline Reed Robertson came up. Caroline was the woman who used to babysit the Barber girls, but the two families had drifted apart after the Barbers had moved to a different area. The Barbers had included her name on their list after Caroline had called the Barbers to seemingly offer support. Police noted that the way Caroline looked now did look like the image Alison had helped to generate. Upon looking into Caroline further, it seemed that Caroline had actually called the Barber home twice the night before Rachel disappeared, with the first call lasting 15 minutes and the second call lasting nearly half an hour. Elizabeth recalled not knowing who was calling, but that Rachel seemed very comfortable and happy to chat to whoever it was. But the more the police looked at Caroline's behaviour, especially after the time of Rachel's apparent disappearance, things became ever more alarming and suspicious. She had called in sick to work on the day that Rachel disappeared, and indeed many of the following days too. During that time, she had hired a man with a van to help her move a statue to her father's rural property in Kilmore, some 60 kilometres or 40 miles north of Melbourne, where the statue was wrapped up and put in a duffel bag before being dropped off. With all of this in mind, the police went to Caroline's flat in Parole on the morning of March the 12th. They got no answer, but given their concerns, they contacted the letting agent of the flat, who gave them a spare key. But this still failed, since the door appeared to be dead-bolted from the inside. Their concerns were such that they made the decision to force entry, and this was when Caroline was found unresponsive, and after initially believing her dead, they found a pulse and rushed her to the hospital. It was later found that she had experienced an epileptic seizure, likely triggered by stress. As Caroline was being treated in the hospital, the police searched Caroline's flat and found a wealth of very telling items. They found a bag of clothes that were size 8, far too small for Caroline, but just the right size for Rachel. They also found partly eaten pizza on 2 plates, suggesting Caroline hadn't eaten alone. But most damning of all were the years of notebooks and diaries they found that indicated a deep self-loathing and a lack of support from her largely emotionally absent parents, and worse still, an apparent obsession with the perfect Rachel Barber. She had written notes about how she would abduct and dispose of Rachel, knocking her out with what she called drowsy powder before killing her, and then apparently assuming her identity and running away into a new life. She had apparently lured Rachel with the offer of conducting a psychological survey that she could not tell anyone, even her parents or boyfriend, about, otherwise it could affect the results. And for doing this, Rachel would get $100 for being involved in the survey. Now, this was all strongly suggestive that Rachel had come to harm, but was not necessarily concrete evidence. But they needn't have worried, because when Caroline had come round following her seizure and was questioned by the police, Caroline simply told them that Rachel was dead, and that she, Caroline, had buried her. Caroline said that after keeping the body in her flat for 2 days, she moved it to the farm property in Kilmore. She refused to say more, saying that she didn't remember what became of Rachel's remains after this. But up in Kilmore, neighbours of the Kilmore property reported seeing Caroline turn up on March the 3rd and drag a bag around the property towards a particular area of trees. When the police searched this area, they saw a wooden cross with the name Lucy on it. And it turned out that this was the burial place for the Robertson family dog that had died years earlier. But near this grave was disturbed ground, and when investigated, this turned out to be the shallow grave of Rachel Barber. She was wrapped in 2 blankets and had a black electric cable knotted around her neck. The investigators concluded that the 15-year-old had been murdered on the night of March the 1st, which was the date that she had gone missing. She had been drugged by eating doctored pizza before being strangled. During her first court appearance on March the 15th, Caroline did not apply for bail, nor did she enter a plea. She simply rocked back and forth in the dock as her lawyer told the court the only thing their client remembered from the evening of March the 1st was inviting Rachel back to her flat and the two ordering pizza, but she recalled nothing about the teenager's death. She admitted to disposing of Rachel's body, but claimed to have been assisted by two men that she couldn't identify. On March the 24th, Rachel Barber's funeral was held, and it was attended by over 850 mourners at St. Hilary's Anglican Church in Kew. The Barbers expressed their gratitude to the detectives of the Missing Persons Unit, who they found to be considerate and sensitive of their ordeal when the case eventually found its way to them. But quite understandably, they were far more critical of the dismissive and unkind response of local officers, but they did subsequently offer the Barbers a formal apology for their inaction during the initial stages of Rachel's disappearance. Great. Thanks so much. In early October 2000, Caroline made the surprising decision that she would instead plead guilty to murdering Rachel Barber, although she continued to claim that she was experiencing amnesia about the details surrounding the killing. Now, this was a bittersweet moment for Rachel's family and friends, who at least would be spared from the emotional ordeal of going through a trial. An impact statement by Michael and Elizabeth Barber detailed the ups and downs of Rachel's short life and the difficulties and doubts that she faced, painting a far more complicated picture of Rachel than it seemed that Caroline had of the perfect girl. Judge Vincent remarked, "The simple reality is that contrary to your distorted perception, there are no perfect lives or perfect people for that matter. But each of us, whatever our situation or status, is unique and irreplaceable. And in our society, the life of each is inviolate, and none can be unlawfully taken." Judge Vincent said that Caroline killed Rachel because she believed that the teenager would likely have a happy and successful life. The kind that Caroline did not anticipate for herself. With him saying, "At one level, it is possible to feel a considerable measure of sympathy and sadness for you. But the incontrovertible and irrevocable fact is that you have killed, and in so doing have created more than one victim. You appear to have been totally self-absorbed, concerned only with your own life situation, feelings, and desires." The judge expressed that her remorse for the crime seemed driven out of self-pity rather than having any real understanding of the significance of what she had done, or indeed any remorse for it. Taking her young age and guilty plea into account, Justice Vincent sentenced Caroline Rhys Robinson to 20 years in prison, with a non-parole period of at least 14 and a half years. And he ended by saying, "In concluding, I have found the task to be extremely difficult in a situation where everyone has lost. But ultimately I must bear in mind that no one has lost as much as Rachel Barber, from whom you took everything." When Caroline Rhys Robertson first applied for parole when she became eligible in 2013, a huge public outcry after a campaign by the Barber family saw her release being delayed.
Melbourne's babysitter killer.
Rachel trusted her.
She murdered their daughter in a jealous rage. In a 9 years investigation, she was sentenced to 20 years but could serve only 12.
I'm really fearful of this.
A family's battle to keep a killer behind bars.
She's got quite a devious, manipulative mind.
See it first on 9 News tomorrow. The parents of a teenage dancer who was strangled by a family friend 13 years ago have expressed alarm about her murderer's possible release from prison. Rachel Barber's parents warn that Caroline Rhys Robertson is a manipulator who may try to trick the parole board. They spoke exclusively to Karen Huff.
A brutal murderer who obsessed about pretty Rachel Barber diarised her deadly fantasies, then killed her in a jealous rage. Caroline Rhys Robertson is eligible for release next year.
I'm really fearful of this. I mean, I spoke to the victims registrar and I said, I don't want Caroline to come looking for us.
Rhys Robertson was jailed for 20 years in 2000. Her innocent victim's parents have penned a letter of warning to the parole board, which will assess her in July and look at whether she should be released next year.
She's a loose cannon and you really don't know which way she's going to go because she's such a good actress.
Sentencing Judge Frank Vincent was also concerned about the unusual offender, saying she has a deeply entrenched personality disorder. He said, "You represent a real danger to any who may become the unfortunate subject of your fixation." He also had grave reservations about her rehabilitation prospects. All this in a climate where parole violators are being examined with sharp focus by Victorian authorities after 11 of them committed murder in a recent 2.5-year period. And with the system appearing to fail, the Barbers are even more concerned about what the parole board will do.
I want them to be absolutely certain that she is of sound mind because of how manipulative she has been in the past.
Karen Huff, 9 News.
The family of a murdered teenager has rallied outside the Parole board in a bid to keep the killer behind bars. 15-year-old Rachel Barber was a beautiful, promising dancer, strangled by an obsessed young woman who wanted to steal her identity.
Elizabeth Barber is haunted by her daughter's murder and horrified the killer could be free in just over a year. The 15-year-old dancer was strangled in 1999 by her former babysitter, Caroline Reid Robertson, and buried in a shallow grave at Kilmore. Rachel's mother wrote a book and the chilling case was made into a film, focusing on the plain 19-year-old killer's obsession with her beautiful, popular victim.
You're perfect.
She wanted to be Rachel.
She's dead.
Not.
Reid Robertson was given a 20-year maximum and will be eligible for parole in August next year.
She could well be a risk. I don't see that 14 and a half years is enough time.
The Barbers are desperate to keep her behind bars.
Please write to the adult parole board. Think of your own children.
You know, I always look back and think, oh, you know, what if she was still here? Where would life be now?
In a statement, the parole board says it will take the family's submissions into consideration, but stresses there are other factors in the decision-making process, such as community safety, the prospect of rehabilitation and a psychological report.
Legal experts say the family was already taken into account when the sentence was handed down, so the Barbers' pleas may be in vain.
I think the parole board won't give enormous weight to their considerations.
I don't think justice will ever be served for Rachel.
Jade Vincent, 10 News.
But she was paroled in 2015 after serving just 16 years in prison.
Good morning. We have some breaking news for you now. A Victorian woman who stalked and murdered her 15-year-old friend in 1999 has just been released on parole after serving 14 years in prison. Let's go live to Today Melbourne reporter Justine Conway. Justine, what more can you tell us about the release? We understand it just happened moments ago.
That's right, Sylvia. Just moments ago, Caroline Reid Robertson was wearing a dark-coloured baseball cap and she was picked up by two friends who drove her away to begin her life of freedom. According to fellow inmates here at the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre, she never really spoke about her crime during her time in custody. That crime, of course, was so shocking it's inspired books and even a telemovie. In 1999, she strangled her friend, her younger friend, 15-year-old Rachel Barber. She hid her body in a wardrobe for several days before burying it in a shallow grave, and this was all in a sick attempt to try and assume the 15-year-old's identity. She wanted to be as beautiful as Rachel, have that personality and that life, and she thought if she killed her, she could become her. So today is a very tough day for the Barber family, Sylvia. They had been hoping that she would spend more time in jail. All they hope now, though, is that she will continue her rehabilitation while outside prison.
All right, Justine Conway with that breaking news. Thank you.
And at this time, she was apparently in a lesbian relationship with a fellow inmate. She has kept a low profile and remained off the radar since then. But the question of whether justice was done is still contentious and debatable. So I'd love to know your thoughts on this. Was justice done or not? The case came to public attention again in 2009 with the release of a film adaptation of the story that was supported by the Barber family. Entitled I Am You in Australasia and In Her Skin in Other Global Territories, it was a big name Australian production featuring Guy Pearce and Sam Neill. The film was largely well received but did divide opinion, with people either loving it or hating it. The case once again garnered widespread media attention across Australia in 2021 when a segment on the popular radio show Lauren and Jace, featuring Lauren Phillips and Jason Hawkins, with the pair appearing to laugh at the case in a segment about Lauren having fallen out with her partner.
My partner and I had a big blow up. It was one of those fights where I was like, I'm out of here. And I slammed the door and I stormed out of the house. And then I was like, what am I going to do now?
He would have been like, awesome, I got the house to myself.
And I was like, I'm going to listen to a podcast to try and just clear my mind and try and fix my mood. This is what I played.
After strangling Rachel with a telephone cord, Caroline hid her body in her bedroom cupboard for 2 days before bundling her up in a bag.
I literally walked down Tarak Road Googling murder podcasts. Am I a psychopath?
Can you get a welfare check on Paul, her partner? I'm going to need a photo of him with today's paper.
Hey, this just in, a text message from the unit.
Oh, he's alive.
Guys, I actually never even knew she left.
They did issue an apology the following week that you can hear now.
Morning, everyone. Before we get into today's show, there's something Lauren and I wanted to address in relation to last week on the air.
Yes, something happened on our show last week that we need to talk about. I was telling a story about having an argument with my partner and listening to a crime podcast to deal with my mood. To add to that story, it was decided to drop some audio into a segment, and we used audio from what we thought was a fictional crime. Unfortunately, over the weekend, it was brought to our attention that the TikTok audio that we had chosen to use was in fact a snippet from a true crime podcast which occurred here in Melbourne, the murder of Rachel Barber. It was never our intention to use a real crime, and all of us here on the show were devastated when we realised what we had done. The show takes full responsibility, and our background checks on the source of audio should have been more thorough. Both Jason and I have spoken at length to Rachel's mum, Elizabeth, and while the details of those phone calls will remain private, we've both expressed our deepest apologies for the pain that no doubt has resurfaced to the Barber family and their friends due to this audio resurfacing. To Rachel's family and friends, all of us here on the Jason Lauren Show are deeply sorry for any pain that segment has no doubt caused, and we will do everything to ensure a mistake like this never happens again.
Can I just say also thank you to Elizabeth for taking the calls yesterday as well. She didn't have to do that. And, you know, we both had lengthy chats with her. And, yeah, we appreciate them taking the call.
Yeah, I think it's been a tough 48 hours for a lot of people. We're really, from the bottom of our hearts, very, very sorry that audio was used. But we are deeply sorry, and we will do everything in our power to ensure nothing like this ever happens again on our show.
But it seemed like they were trying to shift the blame to the researchers, which certainly makes me feel it was an attempt to climb out of the shit they'd gotten themselves into. Shame on them. So there ends a tale of obsession and envy, with a woman filled with self-loathing, coveting the life of a teenager so much that she tried to take it for herself, and in doing so robbed the world of an incredible young lady who was destined to do great things with her life. Rachel Barber was truly a shining light, and she should be remembered for her talent and potential rather than the grotesque ending she suffered at the hands of a former friend she should have been able to trust. This video is of course dedicated to her, and I hope that she is at peace, and that the years since her tragic death have seen the Barber family be able to navigate their grief and find ways to come to terms with their loss. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. I'm Steve. That reluctant lummox over there is Samson, who rather than coming to say farewell, has decided to storm off in a bit of a mood. So with him doing his diva thing, all that remains is for me to say, I'm Steve, and I'll see you when I see you.
Say that you're ready.